Hi, if you haven't watched Chaz's video, you shouldn't be watching this. Um, I want to make clear from the start. This doesn't comprehensively cover everything in the video, so I'm not deliberately trying to take anything out of context, but if you don't have the full context, naturally some things probably will be. So if you haven't watched that, please go and watch it. Don't watch this without having watched it. That's all I'll say. The only reason I'm making this is because I am, though censored, I am mentioned in the video, and I feel I'm a little bit misrepresented. So if you're watching this and you haven't watched me being misrepresented, well, there's really no reason for you to watch this, so don't do that. That out of the way, I want to talk a little bit about why I'm making this video, who I am. Yeah, most of you watching this won't know me. My name's Leon. I'm at RealWindows95 on Twitter. I've compiled a list of stories that got widely retweeted. I've tweeted about some other things to do with the situation, and that's why I'm in Chaz's video, essentially. It's because of tweets I've made surrounding the situation. I'm not a Fire Emblem YouTuber, although I have made some videos about Fire Emblem games. They've never got more than like 20 views, if that. That was about a year ago as well. That was a while ago. I was just trying out a couple of things to make videos. I'm not doing this to promote anything, so all my videos previously that I've made, apart from one meme video that I made recently, have been unlisted. Because that's not what this is about. I'm mostly doing this to talk about the stuff that involves me. The stuff that involves me isn't very important. Let's make that clear. I'm not personally hurt by this. I'm not personally affected by this in a direct way. Some of the things we're going to talk about are distressing. They've distressed me. They'll probably distress you. Content warning, I suppose. Going into this, you probably know what we're going to talk about, but content warning, there will be discussions of things like rape, sexual assault, that sort of thing. So, the background. I once read, this will become relevant in a second, I once read when I was at university a book called Expectations Westward by the University of Hull professor Dr. P.A.M. Taylor. Now, the book was dealing with a controversial topic, especially at the time when in the British Isles where the book was written, the subjects of the book weren't as well known. They weren't really very well known here. It was written in like the 50s. It was about the Mormon Church. Now, I'm not a Mormon. This isn't about Mormonism. But what the author wrote is anyone who writes on Mormon history should state his point of view. The author there was very clearly laying out, coming into this is a controversial topic. Someone who's in the church are going to have a bias in their views. Someone who's out of the church is going to have a bias in their views. There's not a neutral ground on this issue. And I've thought about that a lot as a historian. I was studying history at the time, about how we need to acknowledge our biases when we go into stuff rather than pretend they don't exist. And I bring that up because in this situation, I think it's very important going into any video about this that someone tells you, unless it's obvious, what their bias is, what they already think, because there's no neutral ground here. No one who's watching this video, unless you've randomly stumbled upon this and are still watching this even though I told you to go and watch the Chaz video, no one should be coming into this video without a view on this. There will be people who believe indie. There will be people who believe Chaz. I need to let you guys know now where I'm at with that. I didn't believe Indy when she first came forward. I used to believe Chaz. I'll bring up this tweet here. This is from the 11th of July. And I'll read it out to you. So it says, The person I'm responding to says, false accusations made with the intent of ruining someone's career can be as consequential to the one accused as a real accusation can. You know what happened to Pro Jared last year. Now, I'm not going to go into that. That's not necessarily pertinent. What is pertinent is how he handled it compared to how at the time Chaz handled this. Chaz talks about in his video, and we'll go over it later, how he reacted wrongly to this, how he regrets how he reacted to this. Equally, look how he handled it. He didn't get an entire community to pile on people. He here is Pro Jared. He didn't make jokes and act all flippant. He took time, effort, and care to ensure that he responded in an appropriate and clear way. We know where we are with Pro Jared, and I think that's a true statement. I still think that's a true statement. Wherever you come to judge Pro Jared in ethical, moral, legal terms, you know where you stand with him. Whereas at this time, you didn't with Chaz because of his actions. So I say, while I don't think Chaz did anything, and that's the key thing here, I didn't think Chaz had done this. I didn't believe the victim. I have to be honest, there will always be a large amount of doubt in the back of my mind. Doubt that he was in fact an abuser who has managed to get a community to pile on his victims and silence him. That isn't a good thing. And it wasn't a good thing. I say this because I, going into this video, didn't believe Chaz because of things he had already said. Coming out of this video, I still don't believe Chaz. Well, that's not strictly true, and we'll get into it fully, but let me show you a later tweet. This tweet, I believe, is from the 13th. Yes, yeah, there we go. So Chaz has tweeted out his more formal response to Indy's allegations. In it, he talks about how he regrets how he acted in how he first responded to it. And he lays out his perspective of the situation. And as I say here, unless Chaz is misrepresenting what happened, it is very clear there was an imbalance, and Chaz kept pushing it every step of the way. He says he got a yes eventually. He says. Later I say, I trust the evidence, and Chaz himself admitted to essentially pressuring and coercing her being Indy, into what he calls consensual sex. That is clear. That is my perspective going into this. My perspective isn't one of a Mangs fan who wants to defend Mangs. Fuck Mangs. Mangs did very horrible, awful things. I'm not coming out of the perspective of someone who always believed Indy. Even if I later now regret that fact, it is pertinent and it is important to know that I initially believed Chaz. That is an important thing to know. So why did I believe Chaz? Why didn't I want to believe a victim? I will say a couple of times throughout this, I imagine, and this part isn't scripted. There's a couple of parts where we're talking about important allegations that aren't to do with me that I've scripted properly. I watched the video at 1 AM. It's now like 9 AM local time, so I've spent a lot of time going over this so I can not fuck up, basically, on the important parts. Stuff about me, that's not important. If I say something stupid or I fuck up, or that's fine. I don't care. But the important stuff, that's scripted. But why did I believe Chaz? I believe Chaz because, and we will get into this later, when he first posted about Mangs, before we knew what Mangs had done, I believed Mangs when Mangs said that he was abused and that he was being bullied and that people were being mean to him. I believed Mangs, and I was quite nasty, I would say, to Chaz. And I felt guilty. And after I apologised and after I shared Goose's story when that came out, Chaz replied to me, and then we got a conversation in the messages. I'll show you that later. And he was very nice and very friendly and very charismatic, and even though I had never really watched Mangs' content, I had never really watched Chaz's content, I didn't want to believe this sort of thing about Chaz, and I think that's true of a lot of people. I think people don't want to believe this sort of thing about Chaz. He is a very charismatic person. He is a very nice person in many ways. So if that's the situation you're in, I might not be like that now going into this, but I've been there and I get it, and all I can ask is that you try and Acknowledge that you're biased in one way, just like I'm acknowledging now that I'm biased in another, and we can accept that, we can look at that, and we can try and put that to one side while we look at the facts. And I think that's what I want to go over first. I think that's what's more important. More important than my small stuff is the substance of the video and the actual substance of what we need to look at. So Chaz himself, at the end of his video, he expresses a preference for people addressing this sort of stuff via YouTube, via more detailed platforms than Twitter. So that's what I'm doing here. Now, essentially, I'm going to play bits of his video, address them, and just cover stuff between him and between Indy. I'm doing this because it's relevant. I'm doing this because it's in the video he states. Now, it's not my place to speak for anyone, Chaz or Indy, so I'm going to try not to do that. If I do anything like that, let me know and definitely ignore me. What I am going to try and do is present both sides, present the facts as they're laid out by people, and give you my interpretation of those facts. My interpretation. No one else's. Now, if that interpretation helps you understand why I see this as a problem, why lots of people see this as a problem, that's great. If it doesn't, that's fine too. But again, do not watch this unless you have watched Chaz's video, because I am going to look at things assuming you have watched it. So if you haven't, he will be taken out of context. That's all I'll say. Okay. So the first thing I want to address about the video is the fact that the video is monetized. Now, Chaz says that he'll be donating the revenue to an appropriate charity. I assume he's going to provide proof, and assuming that he does, this is really a moot point. I do want to point out, though, the reason I'm pointing this out is he says that the reason he's monetizing it is for algorithm suppression reasons. And that doesn't really make sense to me. Like I say, I'm not a big creator. He probably knows more about the algorithm than me. But it's my understanding, and it's a lot of people's understanding, and what YouTube claim is that as far as we can tell, and from what they say, they don't prioritize monetized videos for recommendation. So I don't see any reason to necessarily monetize this. Regardless, it's not unreasonable to believe that YouTube would prioritize money-generating content. So this is only really an issue if he keeps the money, which I'm sure he will show proof that he has donated the revenue from this once it's accrued to a significant amount.
She felt as though I shouldn't be supporting my friend or other victims without first reflecting on my own actions.
So this part here, she felt as though I shouldn't be supporting my friend or other victims. This is straight up a lie. Indy there isn't saying that other victims don't need to be heard or deserve to be heard. She's saying specifically, she's saying that seeing Chaz talk about a topic while not taking accountability is something she feels the need to speak up about. Framing it like Chaz does is poisoning the well. What that means is it's a tactic to preemptively discredit someone, not based on what they're going to say, not based on relevant factors, but based on something unrelated. Indy talking about other people's accounts is unrelated. It's not related to what actually happened. The other thing I want to address is throughout this video, Chaz shows a lot of DMs, he shows a lot of messages, and we can basically assume that the overlap between what he shows and the overlap between what she shows, they both show it, so unless they're both lying, which doesn't make sense, it's true. Later, when responding to Indy's allegation, Chaz makes a big fuss about how certain things are supposedly doctored. And I'm not saying we have a guarantee for everything. Certainly some things that Chaz presented are only presented by him. Some things that Indy presented are only presented by her. Both of those could be doctored. But looking at just the stuff that Chaz presents, if we assume that's true, and especially the stuff that overlaps, if we assume that's true, we have to really look at and acknowledge what it means.
Believe me, as I said in my first statement, I am too. In this conversation, I pushed the option of staying in a double hotel room when she had clearly communicated to me that she was not okay with the idea of planning to share a room before meeting me in person. I'd like to think that I...
So what we have there is further confirmation that Chaz is admitting to doing something that we should be disappointed in. This builds on what he said in his initial statement, and I'll bring the DM back up. What he says here is what we should be disappointed in is that he was pressuring someone to stay in a hotel with him when they didn't want to. So that's a fact. That's an acknowledged fact. He has done something coercive. He has done something wrong. Now, some people are confused on this, and Chaz brings it up later. This night, according to Chaz, as far as I'm aware, they didn't stay in a hotel together. A lot of people conflate this. They think the 18th is the night of the incident and they stayed in a hotel and something happened. That's not what happened. Nonetheless, even though Indy didn't end up staying in a hotel with him, the manipulative behaviour is there. The force is there. It's the beginning of a pattern. On its own, it's not enough to draw any conclusion from, but it is relevant and it's worth bearing this in mind as we look at other stuff.
But my words in that DM don't reflect that I'm aware of that.
So here he's saying that his words there, they don't reflect that he is aware of. By that, he is referring to his previous section where he talks about, women face harassment, women have valid reasons to not want to stay in a hotel room with a strange man. Apparently, he says his words in the DM don't reflect that he's aware of that. So he's saying he was aware of that at the time, but he just ignored it, I guess? I don't know. He doesn't say why his words don't reflect that, but he does admit there that he was aware of that. Yeah.
We still often talked about meeting up in person and going out on a real date, with the idea coming up more and more regularly from her as our relationship progressed. I genuinely thought that being proactive about seeing her would show that my intentions were honest. It's a concept that she clearly communicated to me and pushed very often.
So here, Chaz is trying to imply that the fact that she wanted to meet up for a date means that nothing bad could happen on that date, or that she couldn't later be uncomfortable. Meeting up for a date doesn't imply consent for anything other than meeting up to see if you want to explore things further. I've been on dates before. When I go on a date with someone, I don't assume the date's going to go well. I don't assume they're not going to see me and be like, actually, not for me, I want to go. That's not what a date is. A date isn't a relationship. A date is a date. So meeting up for a date doesn't imply consent. This has very little bearing, if any, on the claims that Indy actually makes. So again, really to me, this seems like poisoning the well. It just is using unrelated facts to imply that she wanted it, I guess. Also, the idea of a fan wanting to meet a creator is hardly shocking. The onus is on you in a position of power to say no, not to string someone along.
Do I wish she had been more honest and upfront about it? Of course. But
so here he says specifically, she has the right to change her mind whenever she feels uncomfortable. Good statement on its own. However, he then highlights this piece of text to imply that this is a lie. There's nothing to say that wanting to meet up with someone a lot means that you're okay with meeting them alone, or that you can't change your mind, or that you can't have wanted to meet them and then change your mind when you could only meet them alone. She wanted him to fly out and repeatedly asked for that. That, according to what Chaz has shown, is true. None of that implies that if he had flown out, that she would have met him alone. I kept arranging and rearranging how we were going to meet up simply because I wasn't okay with meeting him alone in these circumstances. That doesn't contradict anything he's shown. It doesn't contradict anything she said. Going back to that earlier conversation, Chaz does have something to say about it here at 6:26.
This moment is being levied as the sole piece of evidence for multiple allegations against me.
That's simply not true. Far more than this has been presented. This wasn't, as far as I'm aware, I could be wrong on that. I'm going off what Chaz has said here, not necessarily over everything that was shown originally, because Chaz has deleted a lot of stuff, but according to Chaz, later, this wasn't in the original allegation. So to say that this is the sole piece of evidence for multiple allegations against him, I can't see anything other to call it than a lie. Other evidence was presented. Whether he wants to claim the evidence isn't true, that's separate, but again, this is just trying to discredit her baselessly.
Both implicitly and explicitly by Indy. It's upsetting that what I thought was an opportunity of growth for ourselves and our relationship is now being leveraged in this way.
To me, this is a concerning statement. Because as much as he can say sorry, to say this shows to him that taking accountability for this conversation specifically, not for the rest of it, because again, just this conversation, but to him, he feels that it's unreasonable that he should have to take accountability for this conversation. He shouldn't have to take account of this. So any apology for this is suspect. Ultimately, this apology is not my place to take, it's not your place to say. So only Indy can look at this statement and decide if he feels that he is genuinely sorry for this. You know, they've discussed it before, and he's discussing it again now. But the context sort of makes it look like, well, you think it's leverage rather than growth. Now, this is a part that greatly upsets me, because it is misrepresentation in quite a bad way. So we have this diagram here. It says, being upset at someone for changing plans is not sexual coercion. Let me just play this, give you some more context.
Including not meeting up at all. It's disingenuous to use this one moment as some sort of precedent of sexual coercion in another, when it is not, or that it sets a precedent that I am even capable of forcing someone to have sex with me, with zero evidence or references of that serious allegation even occurring. It would be...
So here he is saying that what happened in that moment, what happened in those messages, isn't the same as sexual coercion. And that's correct, it isn't. Being upset at someone changing plans, however, is not what he was. He was coercive in an unbalanced situation and tried to make someone do something they didn't want to do. That isn't the same as sexual coercion. The sexual coercion is talked about as its own event. Falsely tying the two together is just as wrong there as it would be if it was presented alone. But it wasn't presented alone. As evidence, other evidence was given about the sexual coercion. If Indy had just sat there and only shown that message and said, this event 2 days ago means that things were bad when we went to that Airbnb, that would be just as wrong as what Chaz is doing here, but that isn't what happened. More comes from this later. If we look at,
precedent of consent. Just like it would be disingenuous to say that because Indy was pressuring for me to showcase effort to see her, that it set a precedent for me to pressure her back after she changes her mind.
So this comparison here, it's gross and it's disgusting, and it's designed to deliberately draw attention to the victim being sexually explicit in messages. I cannot see any other purpose of using that analogy. It's a faulty analogy because it's based on a faulty premise that the claim of assault is only because of the coercive meeting. But further, no matter what he says in his words, the purpose of this is to draw attention to the fact that Indy pressured him into making those plans, that Indy was sexually explicit in messaging with him. Those things happened. Indy wanted to meet him, according to the messages he shows. Indy talked sexually with him. I don't see any necessary reason to doubt that, but I don't see how that's relevant to the event of the night, or whether that's relevant to consent. Talking sexually is not consent. Making plans to meet someone is not consent.
Never went to that hotel. Many are blurring the optics and saying we did. I dropped the idea of the hotel after this conversation and made other plans entirely.
So yeah, again, they never went to that hotel. As far as I'm aware, that claim isn't made by Indy. So phrasing it like that again is poisoning the well. The claim is that stuff happened at an Airbnb, and that is what's mentioned in that message there. So to say they went to the hotel together is wrong, and to say that coercion in that message led to them going to a hotel together, that's wrong. If that's what you think, if that's what you've been saying, you are incorrect. But that's also not relevant to what Indy's claiming.
She changed her mind once again. This time I met her in person, beforehand, under her own pretenses.
So here he's saying that she somehow changed her mind about what happened, and is now lying, and is now saying that this was a great time. Someone being coerced by someone else, and not having a good time, pretending that they had a good time out of politeness, isn't denying that uncomfortableness. I know I've said it a lot, and I'll keep saying a lot, but again, to me this seems like poisoning that well, because it doesn't have any substantive bearing on the events of that night. What we should look at are facts and not spin. This is character assassination, this is spin. He talks about more about how she paints the dates in a positive light.
For the rest of that night, even in her first set of allegations from August 2019, she paints our date in an overall positive light.
This I want to focus in on because this isn't necessarily the case. She says that it was harmless enough. Harmless enough. Which, firstly, in comparison to what else is alleged in that night, that still leaves a lot of room for what she later said it was. But even without that, it doesn't preclude anything she later said. A dominating, very flirty meet at a bar, it's uncomfortable, but it doesn't really have any lasting harm. It's a bad date. Were it not for the rest of the story, that would be harmless enough. It would just be a bad date and you'd move on. So, there is no contradiction here. There simply is no contradiction here. Now, this is Chaz's story of them meeting at the bar before they went to the Airbnb. This is his story of what happened.
Our plans finally lined up with each other. Later, I asked her if I could kiss her, and she enthusiastically said yes. Over time, our kissing became more prolonged. I used to work as a bartender, and so I felt bad for anyone who would be forced to watch our PDA while they worked. And so we moved to a couched area by the front of the building. But I think that us being semi-secluded escalated our intimacy more. She was smiling and enjoying herself, and so was I. But it got to a point where I felt a little bit uncomfortable displaying so much affection publicly. This is why we left the bar to walk around LA, and to possibly find somewhere else to go that was a little bit more secluded. Unfortunately, we had been talking, kissing, and generally enjoying ourselves for so long that everything in the area was either closing or had already closed. Indy told...
So, we see in this story, he is repeatedly the one initiating. They drank together and he asked her to kiss. He initiated. Now, I'm not saying it's assault. I'm not saying he did anything wrong by asking to kiss a girl. But nor is it consent to go further. To alone say that this proves anything, either way, would be poisoning the well. If he says that this kissing proves consent, he would be lying. He doesn't say that. If I said he said that, I would be lying. If I said that this proves something, I would be lying. It's just part of the story, but it's a fact that we need to keep in mind for later. He initiated the kissing. He took her to a secluded area. He escalated things. He was the one continually escalating things. That in and of itself is not bad, and I do not want you to take that as an argument. I just want you to keep that in mind.
Told me before we made plans at this bar that she would be giving me a ride home. I still had all my luggage on me from traveling to Dana Point to LA. However, her sister had apparently already taken her car home, so I asked if she wanted to take an Uber back to my place either way. Her first response was that her sister wanted her back home. I thought for a second. Up until this point, I had heard a lot of excuses on Discord that felt like Indy deflecting rather than Indy being honest about what she really felt and what she really wanted. She had told me we would meet on Saturday at Dana Point and then drive to LA together. Then she told me that it would disappoint her friends if she made plans with me. Then she told me that her friend is coming with us. Then she told me she could only see me on Tuesday. Then she told me she got sick. Then she told me she's spending time with her sister. Then she told me to make other plans entirely. Then she told me to meet her in this bar and that she'd drive me home afterwards. Indy was standing right in front of me. And frankly, I was growing weary of hearing her excuses. I just wanted to know what she wanted. And what I said next, I remember distinctly. And it also lines up with every single account of this situation so far. Indy, you're an adult with your own self-agency. What do you want to do? If she didn't want to come back to my place, that would be fine. Just like us not meeting up at all would have been fine as well. She answered my direct question by admitting that she wanted to go back to my place with me. And
This is why the first conversation, being coercive, is important. In his whole description before this, Chaz shows that he does not respect Indy's feelings and only views them as deflections, that he knows what she really wants. He talks about all the times where she said, "No, I'm not comfortable with this. No, I don't want to do this." And he says that those are deflections. That is concerning. He says, "Indy was standing right in front of me, and frankly, I was growing weary of hearing her excuses. I just wanted to know what she wanted, and what I said next I remember distinctly. Bear in mind, Chaz has already decided what she wanted and what is deflection. He's judging in his mind whether her saying no is deflection or not. And we don't have an example of her saying no that's not a deflection, because she said yes after he kept pushing it. Chaz said to her, after these so-called deflections, "Indy, you're an adult with your own self-agency. What do you want to do?" On its own, and this is how he's going to paint it, on its own, this seems like the gold standard of consent. But with the context of all the coercion and the rejection of the polite ways of saying no, it is far from it. It says, "I will not accept a polite no. You must tell me straight up, in a way that makes you uncomfortable, that you will not come back with me." This is what coercion is. Putting someone in a situation where they feel uncomfortable saying no. A yes in this situation is meaningless. There's an old cutaway gag in Family Guy where it's Sean Connery as James Bond, and he's just killed a villain, and there's one of the Bond girls, and he says to her, "You're going to have sex with me," and she says no, and he says yes, and she says no, and on and on. And eventually she says fine, and the joke is James Bond as Sean Connery turns around and he says 50 no's and a yes means yes. And the joke is that it very clearly doesn't, and here we have plenty and plenty of no's and then a yes. That is why people find this coercive. That is why people find this concerning, because she's tried to say no in every polite way that she can. Chaz says this. Chaz says that those are deflections. The only way he can get her to say no that he'll accept, apparently, if we take his word for it, is a way that's incredibly uncomfortable for her. 50 no's and a yes does not mean yes. It means no.
she justified it by saying she wanted to make up for the delay in us meeting up. And between her body language and the tone of her voice, I felt that she was being sincere. Her answer didn't include what her friends wanted, or her sister wanted. It was just what she wanted, and I was convinced that this was her being honest with me.
Again, this is just reframing someone saying no politely, someone saying no in a less confrontational way, as somehow less valid. He doesn't get to decide what no means. He doesn't get to decide what is and isn't a valid no.
She also let me know that she would have to go home at some point either way, because her contact case was still at her sister's. I called the Uber, and we went home. It's at this point that I really can't provide any concrete evidence of what happened for the rest of that night, because there is none. I can recount my story from my original statement.
So, this is the most pertinent part of the situation. This is the incident, as I'll refer to it, I guess. The appeal that he's going to make now is an appeal to he said, she said. That's what this video is. That's what's happening. We cannot know for certain the specifics of this point. Only two people can know the certainty of these specifics, Chaz and Indy. But we know from what Chaz has shown what has happened before, and that regardless of what happened at this point, that encounter was someone very sleazily pressuring someone into doing something they didn't want. Don't fall for the he said, she said trap. The only thing that is he said, she said is how far over the line Chaz crossed, not whether he crossed that line.
I can point out the inconsistencies in Indy's accounts. I can say that I know myself enough as a person that I am not capable of the grotesque things she's accusing me of doing. She has her story.
So here's what happened according to Chaz. He asked if she wanted to have sex, and she said yes. If we accept this is true, that yes doesn't prove consent. Asking for a condom doesn't preclude her feeling coerced. If he said no, she would not have felt comfortable refusing. How do we know? Because Chaz points out that after it broke, she didn't feel comfortable saying no to sex without one. Chaz brought a condom, either because he wanted to have sex that night and only had one and then it broke and he couldn't use it, or he had multiple and didn't decide to use another one, or whatever. It's normal to carry a condom in case you get lucky. I would recommend carrying a backup. I think most sensible people do, but if you don't, that's not proof that you're a rapist or anything. But I'm bringing this up because the context of how he found himself having sex with someone who didn't want to have sex without a condom, he even acknowledges that she didn't want to. Let me go back to his own words. In his own words, she was uncomfortable. On his words alone, we can be certain of some key facts. He coerced someone into his Airbnb. He coerced them into sex, both with and then without a condom, and he kept going when he knew they were uncomfortable. It doesn't matter that he eventually stopped. Every assault ends. That doesn't change that the fact we have here, the facts show that what we have is at best sexual assault and at worst rape, depending on your definition and jurisdiction. He can say all he likes that he isn't capable of it. Unless he's lying in what he's showing us now, what happened was that thing. If we accept that he's lying, then we have to believe Indy. I really do want to focus on that because I think this is what a lot of people miss about consent in general and what a lot of people are confused about here. She agreed to sex only with a condom, taking it at its best. Then the condom breaks, and he asks if she wants to continue without protection. So she's showing hesitation, she's saying she doesn't want to do that, and he carries on regardless. He gets a verbal consent, as he says, but he recognises that verbal consent isn't enough, because after a few minutes of having sex with someone who didn't want to have sex with him, he stops, asks again, and carries on, and then stops again, finishes himself, and goes to sleep. That's not appropriate. Finishing yourself isn't appropriate. Having sex with someone who doesn't want to have sex with you, even after it's clear to you that they don't want to have sex with you, that's not appropriate. None of this is appropriate. None of this is okay.
That I am not capable of the grotesque things she's accusing me of doing. She has her story, and I have the chat logs. Regardless of how she truly felt at the...
Now this is disgusting. She has her story and I have the chat logs. Here Chaz is using a message 3 days after the fact to gain post-sexual consent. That's not how consent works. That's simply not how consent works. He says himself that she didn't want to have sex in that situation, that she was uncomfortable, and that's why he stopped. Well, no matter how uncomfortable she was in that situation, what she's saying here doesn't post hoc give consent. It doesn't change that. What he's presenting here completely conflicts with his own telling of the story. This conversation does not accurately reflect the events of that night, but he is now going to present it as though it does. Victims often take a long time to process what happened, and if Indy was comfortable enough to say to Chaz in a message straight away that he assaulted her, that would be abnormal. It's perfectly normal for a victim to try and pretend that what happened between them and their abuser was okay. This message is subjective. You can interpret it in a number of ways. The fact of the matter is, if Chaz is telling the truth, what he laid out, what happened, is at best sexual assault and at worst rape. These two statements of Chaz's, this message and Chaz's statement of the events, contradict. We need to look at that contradiction and say, well, what's a lie? Is this message not fully reflective of Indy's true feelings? Or is Chaz's story a lie? I don't think Chaz would want you to believe his story is a lie, so then we can only conclude that this message, where she says that it was great and that, you know, she's really into sexual stuff with him, isn't fully reflecting what happened.
According to both sets of Indy's allegations, this question specifically was interpreted by Indy as me insisting.
Again, 50 no's and a yes, not still a yes. It was him insisting. Repeatedly asking after a no is insistence. If you won't take no for an answer, it makes someone feel that they can't say no. This is undeniable. He goes on to admit this.
Likewise, in her account, every instance of me directly asking for her consent is also framed as insisting, and implies that I was pressuring her with malicious intent. Upon further consideration and personal reflection, I think if my asking of her consent honestly did make her feel this way, then it's valid. In my mind, asking for consent is just that, permission and acknowledgement from your partner. But from her perspective, I can understand why being asked for consent more than one time as the night progresses for each step of intimacy can stop looking like bullet points and start to be interpreted as pressure,
So this is a dangerous reframing of what he has already described. He implies that multiple questions were asked in a healthy, always affirming consent way. He implies that he only ever asked, over and over again, Indy, are you comfortable with doing this? Indy, are you comfortable with doing this next thing? Indy, are you comfortable with doing this next thing? He's already shown that this isn't the case. He's shown that he has asked her, had a deflection, and then asked again until she says yes.
Though it couldn't be further from my intention, I have realized that outside of this interaction with Indy, I have inadvertently done this with other partners. This is an area of communication and boundaries that I 100% acknowledge can be improved on my part.
Here Chaz is saying something important, and it's not relevant to Indy, so don't take this as something to be used to prove or disprove Indy's allegation. But it's important to what I'm going to talk about later with Chaz and what Chaz says he wants to do. Chaz here is saying that he has a pattern. He's saying that this isn't the first time something like this has happened. He's trying to make it look like the assault was an accident and he just slipped up. It isn't. It's a choice. It's a choice you make when you ignore someone saying no and keep asking for a yes, which Chaz has said he does a lot. Hey, it's about 9 PM local time now. I'm just back from having a sleep, getting something to eat, that sort of thing, just being a bit more refreshed while I sort of go over this conclusion of the Indy section. I still stand by everything I said, even though I hadn't got much sleep. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying, oh, now I'm more rational. I'm just saying, that's where we stand. So, I believe that when we look at what Chaz has presented, Chaz's side, that's really the best case scenario of what happened. That's Chaz telling his story. But even with that side presented, it doesn't look very good. Chaz wants you to believe that he accidentally assaulted someone and so that makes it okay somehow. That's up to you to decide, but the facts here are clear. He asked for consent and was told no, and kept asking till he was told yes. That is in the case of getting to the place where the incident happened, and it's in the case of the incident. He chose to do that, regardless of anything else he says, regardless of whether he fully understood what he was doing, regardless of whether he now feels guilty about how he interacts with people. He had a choice to make. He could have chosen to accept a no, and it would never have got to that situation. They wouldn't have even been in the same B&B together. But he didn't. He didn't choose to accept that no. So if you're okay with that, that's your decision. Like I said at the start of the video, I'm not here to tell you you have to change your mind. I just want you to acknowledge your bias going in. I've acknowledged my bias going in. I'm presenting the facts and my interpretation of the facts. I hope I've made it clear what is and isn't my interpretation, and I hope I've made it clear what is and isn't facts. But let's lay this out. The facts are that Chaz has presented his side of the story, and his side of the story, this is where the opinion comes in, reflects badly on him. But what if it did go further? What if he did go further? What if he is trying to, like many predators, reframe non-consent as consent, just like how he reframed how he asked those questions? Everything else in this video in regards to Indy past this point isn't pertinent to the facts of the case, and it's just character assassination. It's just him trying to make Indy look like a crazy bitch. Those are harsh words. I don't like using that term, and he doesn't use that term, but that's the impression he wants you to have. I still recommend, even with that, I still recommend you watch the whole video, or at the very least, all the parts about Indy, so that way I can't take anything of his out of context. But the thing to remember is, Indy could literally be the worst person ever. It doesn't change the facts of what Chaz did. I think staying in a relationship with someone who did that to you, it would be enough to destabilize anyone, which again could explain why it did, if it did, but again, that's irrelevant. You cannot retroactively give or withdraw consent, and later consent doesn't imply previous consent. Rape victims entering consensual relationships with their rapist is a known and documented thing. So all this stuff Chaz is saying about, oh well, look what she said, and we were in a relationship, and the relationship went sour, and the relationship went bad, and people in relationships that have gone bad do strange things. That doesn't actually change what happened on the night. It doesn't actually change what Chaz himself has told us. So, yeah, I mean, that's the most important thing in this video. That's the most important thing to address. I don't feel like I can make this video about what happened with me, when what happened with me is so tiny compared to what happened to Indy. It would just be grotesque. Now, again, the purpose of this video, the main purpose of this video, is to address the stuff about me, and that's what I'll be doing now after this. But I felt it important to address this. I felt it important to lay out the facts as Chaz presented. And yeah, again, that's basically it. We accept him at face value, and then what has happened is at best assault, at worst rape. Or we have to reject him and hear Indy's side of the story, which he never once fully and properly presents in his video. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to present Indy's side of the story. It's hard to read, and it's hard to listen to, but she deserves to be heard. With everything going on in the FE community at the moment, I feel now is the time to speak up and talk about my experiences. I've been bottling up this anguish for a while now, but I can't bear to keep this to myself anymore, because the more I do, the worse it affects me emotionally. Last year in March, I met up with Chaz Aria LLC for the first time. I wasn't all that excited to meet up with him, because in the month leading up to that meeting, we were just getting past a pointless argument that involved us and several of my friends. At the time of the argument, he had spouted a lot of bullshit about me to my face in the heat of the moment, ranging from me being full of myself to needing to grow up. So naturally, I was on the fence about even meeting. As he continued to insist we should meet, in which he even tried circumventing my Discord settings to try and talk to me, even sent a messenger pigeon to carry out his word when I blocked him for trying, or just flat out refused to talk, I gave him the benefit of the doubt to meet up after prying an apology out of him. I wanted to see if setting aside past transgressions in person and moving forward with whatever sort of relationship we had at the time was worth it. In the week we were preparing to meet up, he would mention his hotel room in Dana Point a few times, and it would make me uncomfortable whenever he'd casually bring it up. We had agreed we would meet up in Los Angeles, where I know people and feel safe, not a completely isolated area where I don't know anyone. That he brought up the hotel room a few times implies he wanted something sexual, which I wasn't comfortable doing at the time. He knew I was uncomfortable, but would brush it aside like my feelings on the matter weren't a big deal. And then she links here the biggest instance of her getting uncomfortable. We just have the messages here, want to hang out in Dana Point. And these are the messages that we've gone over. So again, they're there if you want to read them. They're also presented in the video. When asked why I was so uneasy around him and what he could do to help ease tension going forward, I told him to just not make me do things I wasn't comfortable doing, to which he said he would keep that in mind. I'll be aware of that going in. Yeah. So yeah, there you go. That is the message she's referring to there. When we eventually met up at a bar in LA, my sister and her boyfriend were with me to make sure I wasn't hanging out with some rando. They noticed us seemingly talking effortlessly and having fun, so they felt it was okay to leave me with him. However, for me, the mood shifted a bit once they left. As we were talking, he started towering over me, kind of being domineering in the conversation, and he was flattering me often, but the constant flattering was making me a bit uneasy. I brushed it aside, thinking maybe it was the alcohol talking. At the end of that night, we had just finished walking around the area and ended up across the street from that bar. He was getting an Uber ready to go back to his cousin's Airbnb, but I only wanted to keep him company while he waited, then get my own Uber once he was off on his Uber. I know this is a role reversal, but I felt relatively safe were we to grab my Uber afterwards. Plus, I didn't want him taking my Uber with me and learning where my sister lives. When I told him I planned to go home to my sister, he refused to let me do that and insisted I come back with him to his Airbnb. I voiced profusely how I didn't want to, and was uncomfortable with him insisting, but he continued to pressure me to come back with him. I remember him saying stuff like, "Your sister is probably asleep by now, and worst of all, you're a grown woman capable of making your own decisions. Surely your sister knows that." Apparently a grown woman saying she wants to go home to her family rather than home with a guy she's just meeting for the first time means she's not making her own decisions. Once his Uber arrived, he still looked back at me saying, "Well?" basically asking what I was waiting for. I was completely shattered by what he had told me moments before, in that I am not making decisions for myself, and started feeling a little terrified when he looked back at me. I thought that if I continued to refuse coming back with him, he would continue to insist. At that point, I felt I had no choice but to go back with him. I didn't know what to do, but to pretend things were fine, so the Uber driver wouldn't think something sketchy was happening in the back of his own car. We made it to his room at the Airbnb, and from there he starts pressuring me to do all sorts of things I didn't want to do. He pressured me to take my clothes off, let him fondle me, and coerced me into having sex with him, all of which I never wanted to do, nor wanted him to do to me. He would say things like, "You know you've wanted this too," just to convince me to let it happen. He kept forcing himself onto me and dry humping me to get me in the mood, and when he wouldn't stop telling me I wanted it as well, I gave in to get him to shut up. I told him to at least wear a condom, but when his only condom broke, he insisted we go on without one. I was already terrified of the fact we were even doing this, but even more so when he said it broke. I told him I can't do this anymore and wanted to leave at that point, but he kept insisting we go on. He even tried to pry my legs open to force himself back inside me. All the while I was in such an emotional haze as to what I should do. I wanted to go home so terribly in that moment, but thought that if I tried to do so, he would continue to refuse letting me go, or even go as far to block my only way out. I was so scared of him, so I thought that my only ticket back home was to let him have his way. I even pretended to enjoy myself so this would be over with faster. He passed out immediately after, all the while I laid there, frazzled by what had just transpired. I quickly and quietly put my clothes back on and went home. I've had so much trouble sleeping that night and really wanted to cry, but at the time I had no idea what I would have even been crying about if I had let my tears out. I tried to address this to him once I was back with my sister, but had no idea how to phrase it. And that's the final message she presents here, showing to him. Again, he shows this in the video and says that he regrets his response of "for sure." I was confused, vulnerable, and emotionally exhausted from that experience. I had no idea how to feel about this for months, but in the time I was trying to make sense of that night, I still met up with him a few times after the fact. For a long time, I thought I was making a mountain out of a molehill, that what happened was no big deal, even though something about it seemed off to me at the time I was processing it all. When I first spoke up about it, I said way more than I needed to, because I was terrified of him and what he would use against me, just as much as I'm terrified of him now. I mentioned things that were irrelevant to this very incident, and was essentially lost trying to say something. In my weak attempt to speak up, he used screenshots of way before the meeting to justify his actions. Screenshots of conversations that took place long before that argument, before my feelings and perceptions towards him changed, as well as screenshots from after that incident, to invalidate how I feel and to continue to perpetuate this narrative that I wanted it based on the way I would behave online. Regardless of us having been friends who flirted back and forth often, my perception of him had changed when we had that argument, and didn't feel as comfortable around him when we met, and after the incident was gaslit into thinking nothing was wrong so as to continue seeing him. I can't continue seeing his actions get swept under the rug over and over again, even as he continues getting involved with everyone's stories without even so much as reflecting on his own actions. I feel for this community so much and would never want anyone to go through anything so heinous like me. I feel for Goosaphone and what happened to her. She's really brave for speaking up about it. I feel for the victims in the Smash community and stand by them, word for word. Anyone who hasn't spoken up about their own stories, I feel for you. Stay safe, everyone. Okay, it is now around 3 AM local time, the day after I started sitting down to record this. I've had to take a few breaks in between, both just for personal reasons and for other stuff going on in life. Before we look over the actual stuff in the video that I'm about to respond to here, this is to do with my interactions between Chaz and myself. This was the first interaction I had with Chaz. So you can see here, this is when he tweeted the ring pic to sort of satirise Mangs. Now, according to what Chaz had to say, at this time, he didn't know that Mangs had done anything more than not supporting a friend. That's what he said. That's what he maintained afterwards, and that's what he still maintains, and that's what I was responding to. So I say, I retweet that, and I say, This is really shitty and one of the worst parts of Twitter culture. How fucking dare someone have something to be happy about when bad things happen? People are allowed to have lives. Mangs isn't responsible for the assaults that have happened, and yeah, that phrasing really fucking stings, but that's what I said because that's what I knew at the time. In response, Chaz had this to say. Nobody said he was. Many people in the community, including myself, were disappointed he didn't show solidarity for his close friend. I said what I said. There were much less toxic ways to go about this. It's too much, too soon. So what you're saying is, unless you directly sexually assault someone, you're not responsible for marginalising survivors? Got it. Not enough, not soon enough. Oh, so he marginalised survivors by posting a picture of his watch? That's what you're saying? I've looked over your posts. You're a hypocritical piece of shit and just trying to call out for clout. You said nothing except when it was able to be in the form of a call out. And he responded, what about toxicity again? Have a great day. These tweets were wrong then, and they're wrong now. Now, the perspective I was coming from in that is, I was not a Mangs fan. I had not watched any of his videos apart from, I think, one about the Devil Axe. So that entire perspective was literally just, I saw someone doing something on Twitter that I felt was shitty. I wasn't really that familiar with who Chaz was. I was, of course, familiar with who Mangs is, because, I mean, it's Mangs, even if I didn't watch his content. But I've apologised to this for Chaz. I've apologised to this to people involved, and I was wrong. I was wrong to defend Mangs there. I didn't know the full story, and yeah. But that was my first interaction with Chaz. My second interaction with Chaz, this was after the community post came out. So Chaz tweets this: imagine equating an entire community being more honest about their mental health and sharing their personal stories of trauma to Twitter is so negative / toxic right now. You can just say you don't give a fuck. We get it. Chaz said that on the 4th of July. I responded on the 4th of July at 8:44. And he is referring to there the community post. I see this, I'm angry at Chaz, I'm annoyed at Chaz at this point because I still believe that he's being a dick, that he's being an aggressor, and I look up this post and I see that an abuse survivor, someone claiming to be an abuse survivor, has deleted his Twitter because he's re-traumatized, and so I say that and I respond to that. It later comes out that I was wrong, so in response, I retweet Goose's story, of course, and I apologise. This is when Chaz, he sends a tweet and he says that he can't DM me, but he wanted to say, you know, mad respect coming his way to me. And that's where we get into what is in the video. And I respond in these tweets, so I will I'll show you the context in the video and I'll go over what I say. So if we get that video back up now.
This statement was supposed to serve two purposes for Mangs. One, a preemptive cover-up defense to manufacture sympathy from his audience for the allegations and evidence he knew Goose had. And two, a weaponization of his fan base with a link to misdirect them into attacking what he saw as a threat to himself and his channel. The crazy part about all of this is that it actually worked, exactly as Mangs intended it to.
So this is the first thing I take issue with. You can clearly see that this is my tweet. You can recognize my icon. You can recognize the distinctive snowflakes in my name. Now, I'm not saying that the fact that you can recognize me is a sign that Chaz wanted to make me recognizable. I don't think Chaz wanted to make this recognizable. I don't think Chaz wanted to break anyone else's anonymity. He's been quite clear throughout this that, you know, there's no reason for him to do that. So however else you come to judge him, that's not what I'm saying what's happened. But what I am saying is, if we look at the preceding statement and we look at this, my statement being presented as evidence, he is saying that what I tweeted here was because of Mangs' community post, that I was a fan of Mangs who came from that post to be part of a hate mob to harass him. That's not correct. That is simply factually inaccurate. And what's worse is he has to know from our messages, from our conversation history, that that was inaccurate. Now, I'm not expecting everyone to remember everything. I'm not expecting him to know who specifically did what. So I'm not saying that this is malicious. I'm not saying that it's the worst thing in the world. It certainly isn't. But I take umbrage with my words and my tweets and my actions being used to defend assault. And I especially take umbrage to my words and my actions being taken out of context, especially the context where I've disavowed them and I've apologised, to make it seem like I am supporting Mangs and defending Mangs. Throughout this video, what Chaz does is he uses the Mangs situation as a shield to imply that because Mangs is guilty, he can't be. It's poisoning the well, it's completely irrelevant, and I am disgusted to be a part of that. I'll say this directly now to you, Chaz. I am not your shield. Mangs is not your shield. You cannot keep using other people, whether it's 15-year-old, 16-year-old children, whether it's random British people on the internet, or whether it's other abusive people. You cannot keep using them as shields to hide your own shit.
For a week, I was lambasted for bullying a surprise survivor into deleting his Twitter. People now incorrectly interpreted my tweet exactly as he wanted them to. He had successfully utilized victimhood as a weapon against those speaking out for victims. I ate this harassment for the following week because I was not going to tell Goosophone's story for her. It was her story. I needed to respect that. Many of
So I'll read out what I had to tweet about this. I tweeted this out as I was watching the video. This is literally as far as I got in the video, and I was just horrified, and so I had to tweet it out. So I said, seeing as Chaz has featured me in his video, I will be making a response to it. He takes this completely out of context, says that I and others who harassed him were Mangs fans. I would object to my characterization of what I did as harassment, by the by. I have never been a Mangs fan, and I have a problem with any perceived attack on victims. I've always maintained that this was about abuse survivors like myself, and I called out Chaz long before Mangs made the community post I later referenced. You can see here a message of me, apologising about what happened, and me explaining my motives. As someone who came after Chaz, I think you're doing us both dirty. Who I'm responding to there isn't really relevant, but I'm responding to someone who was mischaracterising both the situations. I said, I for one genuinely said what I said, as I've been a victim and care about victims, not because it's Mangs. And Chaz knew the facts from the start. He didn't go after someone baselessly. He supported a friend. I don't necessarily believe everything about that in that statement is true, but what's definitely still true in that statement is my motivation and reason for doing it. Chaz and I spoke privately after this, and it was clear to him that I was sorry for jumping the gun and that I was not a Mangs fan. And it was clear to me at the time that he was understandably defensive about things because Mangs had put him on blast. I won't read through the whole message history. It's there for transparency if you want, but basically, I say that I was a dick. He says that, he was aggressive because of other people's actions. That's fair enough, but the understanding we both are at that point is what I did wasn't because of Mangs, and apparently what he did was, not anything other than a normal reaction to an innocent person being harassed. Of course, what we later find out does recontextualize things a little, but that's the level I was at going into it. He knows my motivations. He knows entirely what this is about. So this is the rest of the tweet. So I say, I'll talk about this and more important stuff in detail later. But I wasn't a Mangs fan or part of a targeted harassment, and that's just a link to the other tweets that I showed you earlier. Yeah, for 100% clarity, Mangs is a horrible person who did horrible things to many people, and regardless of how you come to judge Chaz in human, moral, legal, or ethical terms, it has zero bearing on the fact that Mangs is guilty of everything he was accused of and needs to be accountable. And I'm not saying that Chaz did something awful to me. He blurred my name, and it's likely no one who doesn't already know me would know that was me unless I said. But the fact is, the info is wrong, and it's about me, so I have a right to correct that misinformation. For clarity, the reason this bothers me isn't because of me, it's because I don't like being part of his video where he attacks his victim and uses another abuser as a shield. A little note on that last tweet. He had blocked me before, after he had been exposed, I suppose you could say, and in making his video, whether it was to get screenshots, whether it's just because he wanted to unblock a lot of people, I don't know what his reason was, but he had since unblocked me. He responded, and I'll show you that response just to be fair in a second, but he responded and that freaked me out a little, so I blocked him. After I post this video, I will unblock him again just in case he does need to respond, whether that's publicly or privately. So here is his response, and again, he admits that he misrepresented me and he apologises. He said, "My apologies if I implied that you specifically were a Mangs fan by doing that. The point was that people felt compelled to want to support a victim they were being told was attacked. I felt that your initial response, paired with the fact that you posted with that snapshot of his community post, was a very clear illustration of how people were misled into initially attacking me out of their own desire to do good. So again, sorry if I misrepresent you in that way." So basically what he said is he knows it's not true, but it formed a convenient narrative. And I guess that is a convenient narrative, but this isn't about narratives, this is about truth. But that's what a lot of the video is, and again, I haven't gone over all of it, so if you haven't watched it, please watch the whole thing, but bear in mind when you do that it's narratives and character assassination, not facts. We've looked at the facts, and the facts tell a story. Anyway, he finally says, "I understand that you feel as though you're not part of a targeted harassment group, but an avalanche is made up of many snowflakes." So he is saying there, and frankly this is fair enough, if he was being harassed and my comments felt harassing to him and they added to that, even though it wasn't my intention, that would certainly add to that. So that's a perfectly fair statement. So I'm actually in the video twice. We'll skip to this part of the video, and I'll give you the context on that as well.
For many, because that expectation to have their mind changed conclusively for themselves was not there, they defaulted to public opinion. Public opinion that, because of the pretense surrounding these allegations, and not the actual allegations themselves, wasn't in my favor at that point.
This is, again, just another complete and utter lie. I showed it at the start of the video because it was important. I will show it again. I used to believe Chaz. So regardless of whatever community opinion was, regardless of ever how it swung, I used to believe Chaz. This is on the 11th of July. So after that tweet where I've been horrible to him, after our messages, I don't think Chaz did anything. That's what it says. That's what it says right there. And then, when did I stop believing him? When he posted his allegations. When I read through his account, his word, his facts, everything he could have provided. And then I saw what he did and was like, well, that's not okay. And that's what annoys me about what he's showing here. He's presenting it as if public opinion changed, and that's why people didn't believe him. He's putting the cart before the horse. What changed is he told his side of the story, and people like me read it and was like, holy fuck, we've made a mistake. Because we have made a mistake. By allowing someone charismatic to trick us into using his honeyed words and fancied speech to make us feel like he didn't do something wrong. So here's the rest of that. Here's what I said. I said, "I'm in there twice. This time it's framed as me not thinking he is guilty without having read his response, and just because the public pretense had shifted against him. At this point I had read his response and both of Indy's allegations. And to be clear, his response is what changed my opinion. I went against my better judgment and didn't believe a victim because Chaz was nice in a DM when I'd been a bit of a tit. I regret that, I will always regret that, and I will always feel culpable for being part of the problem. So that's really my final statement on my interactions with Chaz and what he's put in the video. So, where does that leave us with this? What should we do? What should Chaz do? I wish I had simple answers. The most simple thing that you can do, or I can do, is the very thing I said from the start of this. Acknowledge our bias going into his video, acknowledge our bias going into this video, examine the facts, and make our judgment from there. I'll go over the facts that we know from Chaz one more time. We know that he had a relationship with a fan. We know that he kept getting no's from her and pushing her to go further. We know that he decided what was and wasn't deflection, to use his term. And we know from his account of the night, at the very best, what happened is sexual assault, and at worst, rape. Sex with someone who does not want to have sex with you, as far as I am concerned, and it may be different in your jurisdiction, it may be different to your definition, but sex with someone who doesn't want to have sex with you is rape. That's why that's my term for what I use for it. As far as I'm aware, you know, that isn't a term I'm taking from anyone else. That's a term I use because that's my language, my country, what I'm familiar with. I'm not saying that to misrepresent everything. I'm just saying from my perspective, that's what I read happened. 50 no's and a yes is not a yes, it's a no. Regardless, what's going to happen to Chaz, as he said in his videos, he has a decision to make. He can decide whether to keep making videos, he can decide to stop making videos. If he decides to keep making videos, he's not going to jail because of this, he's not going to have his YouTube channel taken away, nothing like that can happen, or necessarily even should happen. I'm making this video and talking about this video, and people should talk about this, not to cancel, but to hold accountable. If I could have anything come from this, I would have Chaz learn from this. Learn that how he has acted and how he defends his actions isn't okay. It isn't okay to act like that towards women, and if he can truly and genuinely say that he will try his best to never act like that to a woman again, if he will learn and affirm positive consent, that he will always take no for an answer, that's all really we can expect and ask for going forward. You can't change the past, and we can't hold him to justice for the past, so expecting anything else is just a fantasy. What else I would like from him, what else I think would help healing, and what we should expect, is for him to leave the community, for him to stop making Fire Emblem content. I'm not saying he should stop making all content, I'm not saying he should leave YouTube, I'm saying he should stop making Fire Emblem content. You know, he has fans, he has an audience, pivot to something else, because frankly, the community doesn't want him, and the community shouldn't have to put up with him after what he has done to this community. He should move on, and he should learn from this. Now, he can't admit to what he did fully because of the law, because that would, you know, have massive repercussions for him. But in an ideal world, he would admit what he did, and he would apologise to Indy for everything he did. He should, at the very least, in his own way, in a way that won't screw him legally, acknowledge that Indy is telling the truth. You know, he makes a comparison to Mangs, and he does this as a shield, as I say before, and that's what really annoyed me. But let's talk about Mangs. Let's talk about what Mangs did. I won't go into depth, but we all know that Mangs pretended he was going to take a break and that he was going to stop making Fire Emblem content and he was going to do the right thing. And he didn't. He's back and he's not really going to be held accountable. The only people who can hold these people accountable ultimately are themselves. Mangs has no decency. Mangs has decided that he doesn't want to be held accountable. Now, Chaz has talked about before, and he talks about in this video, how angry and frustrated and how disgusted with what Mangs did he is. Well, I'm sorry, but at the end of the day, if you have any sense of decency, Chaz, if you have any sense of decency at all, you'll do the things that Mangs said he would and didn't. You will leave the community. You will stop making Fire Emblem content. And you will let us get on with our lives so we can let you get on with your life. As far as I'm concerned, if you can commit to doing that, if you'll do that, that's the last I'll ever have to say about you. I just want to forget about this and move on. I think we all want to just move on. Let us move on. Take responsibility and let us move on.